Hello everyone, welcome to WooPod episode 10. My name is Rick.
My name is Susie.
And we're going to mark our 10 episode milestone by talking all about generations in the UK. So that's the differences between people of different generations, starting with our grandparents, who are called the silent generation, to our parents, who are called boomers, all the way through to people a bit older than us, who are Gen X, our generation, the millennials, and then through to Gen Z, who are a bit younger than us, and then Gen Alpha, who are still, I think they're still little kids, aren't they?
Yeah,
or
kids
teenagers.
Up until age 15, I think.
Yes. And then finally, the newest generation, which started this year, Gen Beta, which is our children's generation, which is very scary and exciting.
You missed one off. We're missing the greatest generation, who are currently about age 98 to 124.
Okay, so yes, there still are some people who are in their very late 90s, who are even older than our grandparents' generation. We will get to them very briefly. But first, Suze, what have you been up to?
Oh, God, what have I been up to? Something.
Yeah,
Think of something interesting.
Yeah, you're not very active these days. I'm way more active than you.
Oh, yeah, of course. I forgot. I'm pregnant. So, yeah, I've just been a lot of waddling, eating, sitting, less exercise. Yeah, it's a bit sort of slow.
I can imagine, yeah. But I think that's your excuse every time, like, you don't want to do something, or if you feel like you're not doing enough stuff, you can just say, well, I'm pregnant, so I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, because you've always got a reason to say no to things. It's like, I'm just tired. I'm going to go because, the twins are sleepy.
Yeah, that's good. And also, you'll have this excuse basically for the next 10 years of their lives, because you can just make up a problem, or like, oh, I've got to take one of the twins to this thing, or they're sick, or whatever. Like, you just make anything up, so it's easy.
It's definitely like a nesting thing as well, though, because it's like, I do want to see people that I like, but I don't want to go anywhere. So I'm like, come here, come to my house, absolutely fine. But I am not venturing out into town, no.
Yeah, I think this is a very common thing with new parents. They just want to stay at home and sort of domesticating yourself, basically.
What about you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm doing loads of stuff. I'm like really active now, and you're very inactive. So we've essentially swapped roles, because when we started doing this, I was very inactive and you were like doing loads of stuff. So now we've swapped around, which is very interesting.
Oh, so what have you been doing?
I'm in the process of moving to Manchester, which is another city in the UK that listeners may have heard of. It's a very cool city up in the north. And I'm going to move there in 2 weeks' time. So I've got my new apartment, which is very nice.
Quick.
I've sorted it out very quickly.
Wow, you literally just went yesterday or something, didn't you, to view flats?
Just the last weekend, yeah. So I did it in a weekend, and I'm going to move down in the new year. And I'm very excited. It's a cool place. I think, for our listeners, if you ever get the chance, go to Manchester. It's an interesting place. There's lots to do, and it's a taste of the north of England. I think a lot of people just go to London, and that's it. Definitely go and see the north. It's worth seeing, as I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in Manchester. What sort of flat have you got?
It's one of these new ones in a former industrial area that they've renovated and, to be honest, gentrified as well. But it's a very nice apartment. Yeah, I can't wait. It's in a lovely complex. It has like an outdoor area just for residents, quite close to the centre. It's awesome. I can walk to work again, which I couldn't do in Dubai, obviously, because everybody has to drive. So I'm going to be more active, and I just can't wait.
Exciting. For our next series, then, we'll have to update on how is Rick's life in Manchester and how is Susie's life with twins. The new updates whenever we get around to the new series.
Of season 2, yes. So let's start with generations. I thought it was an interesting one to do because there are big differences. Obviously, we all have the same generations all around the world, but there are some particular differences in how generations work in the UK and the West compared to generations in other countries. So I thought it was like really worth talking about. But let's start with the oldest generation, and we'll work our way down through all the different generations.
I thought it was quite a nice one because it kind of ties together some things we've mentioned throughout the whole series about how people behave and how people think. Like, a lot of this varies across generations. So to specifically talk about each generation, hopefully, will be helpful for people to get a broader idea of what the culture is like. Because ultimately, culture is just made up of different groups of people. Age is such a key category. Like, we've all experienced different things in our childhoods. So yeah, it should be interesting.
It is funny how you do get similarities between the generations that go across countries. So it actually cuts across national differences, cultural differences, different religions. And you talk to different people and you do find that there are these similarities. Like, as we'll get onto it, boomers around the world do have very similar traits, which is very strange. You wouldn't think so, but they do. But let's start with our own generation, and then we can work back a little bit, and then we can work forwards. We're both millennial, aren't we? We're actually born in the same month and the same year. So we're in exactly the same section of our generation.
So we're currently 32.
Yep, we're 32 years of age, unfortunately.
It's a good age, especially for men.
That's true. I am actually really enjoying my 30s so far, so I shouldn't complain. Millennials, yeah. So basically, if you're born from the early 80s all the way up to the mid-90s, you're a millennial. I'd love to know if our listeners agree with this too, is when I think of millennials, I sort of think of them as a kind of an unlucky generation.
Really?
Yes, I do, in some ways. We always get compared to Gen X and the boomers because we missed out on a lot of the so-called good times in at least in the West.
Yeah, we missed out on the 80s.
We missed out on that.
The 80s sounded cool.
It did sound very cool. Basically, to explain to our listeners, the boomers and Gen X, so kind of people born before us, they kind of lived through very strong growth years for the West economically. Economies were growing fast. There was like more jobs, more opportunities. If you went to university, you often didn't have to pay for it. Almost nobody had a degree, so it opened lots of doors for you. House prices were very low. You could get a big house for not much money. Cars were cheaper. Like there's all kinds of different advantages that they got financially that we didn't get. So that's why when I think of millennials, I tend to think of them as a bit of an unlucky generation. We were teenagers when we had what's called the Great Recession or the credit crunch, which was the huge financial crisis that affected the world in 2008-9. In the UK, we then had Brexit, which was another huge moment of chaos for our country. Lots of uncertainty, bad things happening. Then we had, obviously, COVID, which came along in our late 20s. So we've basically just had, it's quite a joke. It's a joke that people make online, is that we've had 3 once-in-a-generation events within the space of 10 years, but you're only supposed to have one once-in-a-generation thing happen to you.
I just think that one thing's really lucky for us is that we didn't quite grow up with social media. I think we were like, age 14, 15 when Facebook took off. Our brains were kind of already formed to a certain extent.
I think that's actually a really good point. We're probably the last generation to really have that maybe more old school way of thinking where you can just concentrate for long periods of time and not get distracted all the time. And I think as well, one thing that we are luckier than previous generations for is the technology that we had around us as we grew up. Smartphones became a thing when we were in high school. We had the internet from a very young age. Everything was digitalizing when we were kids. So we grew up with all this stuff and we know how to use it kind of intuitively. Yeah, we're lucky to have the technology that we had growing up. So the internet, computers, smartphones, that's huge. I got those in high school. Been very lucky with how things have digitalized really rapidly from our childhood. But also, we have very, very faint memories of the pre-digital world. I can just remember a time when most people didn't have mobile phones and we didn't use the internet all the time and we weren't on our phones constantly. So we can just remember that, which I think is quite important as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for me, that's like the golden era. I vaguely remember that as a time before my brain started being really distracted.
Yeah, same. I think things have changed a lot in the last 5-10 years, especially in terms of our attention spans, which does scare me quite a lot because I just can't concentrate on things the same as I used to anymore.
Like, do you use TikTok? You are quite a big TikTok fan, aren't you?
I do really like TikTok. I've limited myself to 15 minutes a day, but sometimes I do go over my limit. So it is...
Do you actually manage to stick to that?
Generally, yes. Instagram, I struggle with more. I should have 15 of that, but generally, I can stick to it. So I think we're kind of very lucky in some respects and very unlucky in other respects. What do you think of when you think of millennials?
I think I've had a few conversations with my sister about this. So she's Gen Z. She's 23. She says we're all about finding ourselves and trying to escape and like traveling abroad to just like be free. And we're all about sort of like self-help and healing and this sort of thing. Like we're sort of quite anxious and a bit troubled and trying to heal ourselves. But I wonder if it's also, is it just anyone who's between the ages of late 20s and early 40s? Like that's the most stressful time of life. So maybe all generations go through that phase? I don't know.
I disagree, actually. I think we're a particularly anxious, over-therapized, very inward-looking, introspective, possibly self-indulgent generation.
Why do you think we're like that?
Because I think we were quite spoiled by our parents' generation, the boomers. I think they lavished a lot of attention and made us believe that we were like super special and that everything had to be really good for us and that we shouldn't expect any difficulties in life. And then when that's not matched up with reality, I think this is all the anxiety, all of the overthinking. And also we've grown up in very uncertain times as well.
And why would the boomers have spoiled us like that? It's probably because they grew up in times of more austerity and they weren't treated so lavishly. So they're like, okay, I'm going to give my kids what I didn't have. Whatever you want, possibilities, hopes. Especially
materially. Because they did really well as a generation, they passed on those high expectations to us, which again didn't match with reality. hence all of the anxiety, the disappointment, the stress.
I don't know. Again, I'm not sure if this is like, is this an experience that everyone has? But it seemed to me like there was this bright, hopeful future, and then you go to university, and then you go out into the world, and you're like, wait, is this it? Where's the bright, exciting future that I was expecting? Just very humdrum and mundane.
I know 100%. I do think a lot of people can probably empathize with that. But yeah, I do think we, as a generation, we were sold a little bit of a dream that just has not come true in any way, shape or form.
Especially the fact that a lot of our generation won't achieve the same material comfort that our parents did. Have you seen new studies about classes and how the class system's changing in the UK? It was kind of a while ago, actually. I think it was like a 2013 study, but looking at how upper, middle and working class has shifted. And a lot of the middle class are sort of splitting into like lower middle, upper middle. A lot of the working class, because of new opportunities, new technology, can move up a bracket in terms of like income. And then the upper class is like non-existent now, like 1 or 2%. But basically that middle class, like a lot of people can't continue that lifestyle that their parents had.
Yes, I think this is a really key development in our generation, is the so-called squeezed middle. Back in the day, sort of our parents' generation, you could be a single income family, so maybe just the dad works or something like that, and you'd have enough money for a decent house. You could have extra things for your kids, holidays, toys, bikes, all kinds of things, and you still have money left over to save. So you can build up your wealth quite easily, and only one person in the family is working. You do the same job for 30 years at the same company, you retire early, maybe in your 60s, you have a really nice pension, and that's it. You have a great life. That system has basically crumbled over the past 20 years. Almost no one in our generation will retire at 60. You definitely can't run a family on a single income. That's almost impossible now because wages have stagnated and costs have risen. This is the classic millennial dilemma, is how am I going to buy a house? The ultimate challenge of our lives is, how am I going to buy a house? Where am I going to buy a house? I can't get on the property ladder, blah, blah, blah. These are problems that I'm having right now. And I know you've now got a property, but it took a while as well. And you can't get the exact one you want, and it's tricky. And this is like a central challenge of our generation. Materially, we're just not at the level that we expected. But that's kind of it. What else did your sister say about millennials?
I think she says that her generation, so Gen Z, are more kind of practical, get on with it, like a bit more savvy. Yeah, millennials are just trying to escape. I think that's basically the crux of what she said.
I think it's interesting. I know we're kind of getting into like Gen Z now, but a bit more level-headed than we are. They're not. I mean, having said that, though, they also, like, mental health is a huge part of the Gen Z.
I feel actually really sorry for Gen Z. I feel like they've had it way worse than us. They've been the butt of the experiment of social media. That's
true. They have been exposed to that, and obviously scrolling stuff and TikTok and all these things. So they've been like, their brains have been pulverized by this stuff. But equally, I do agree with you, they're a bit more practical, and I think they went into life with lower expectations than we did. So they're not as bamboozled by how crazy the world is and how difficult things are. They're just getting on with it. They're all about side hustles and doing their own thing, and in a way they're more similar to the boomers, who are much more about get on with it, find a way, keep working. Whereas I think we were sort of caught in the middle.
Yeah, it's like, I think we sort of held on to the tail end of that dream of, if I work hard and I do the right things, I'm going to be rewarded. Whereas Gen Z are more aware of the fact that no, the system's not necessarily set up to reward you. You need to kind of make your own way. So they'll put up with less in terms of work, which I think is really good. And I like that in a way. But I think they don't really get on with the older generations in that sense. Because the older generations are like, you need to hold down a job and stick with it and blah, blah, blah. And Gen Z's like, it's not working for me, I'm moving on. And I guess that's quite threatening to older generations who are, that's been their whole life, maybe, sticking with 1 or 2 jobs. So to see someone just dance around and it actually work out for them is quite threatening to what you've dedicated your life to.
Exactly. It's their whole worldview and system being ignored essentially by Gen Z. As you say, if it's not working for me, I'm not going to do it. They might say stuff like, I'm just not available to work at these times, and just tell their boss that. And their boss is just like, hang on, but you haven't cleared it with me. And they're just like, well, that's what I'm doing. So get used to it, which is crazy to even our generation.
I did have a really interesting experience with a Gen Z teacher who was due to start with us. And I think there was, in the beginning, sometimes there's miscommunication. Everyone's sort of learning how things work. And we didn't have many teachers at the time, but she basically wasn't sure if she had a class the next day. And she sent a really sassy email that was like, this is totally not okay. And I've been really stressed not knowing if this class is happening. I quit. And she'd literally just started. Like, this was like second communication with her. And I was like, oh, really sorry. Turns out that class is not happening or whatever. Sort of, I'm prepared to look past this and obviously we'll, get a smoother relationship so you know what's going on. It turns out that she had made a mistake or something. And I was like, okay, no worries. Are you still going to be working with us? She's like, no, I still resign. And I was just so baffled. Like, you're resigning because something didn't quite go the way that you expected. Like, what are you gonna, like, all jobs have things like that, right? Where things are frustrating, it's not always as you expect. And I was just like, good luck to you, honestly. Like, if you can't handle that, oh my God. So I was reflecting on why did that happen, or how could, because what I would expect is someone, the first stage is to say, hey, not sure if this class is happening, just checking in kind of thing. Like, first you ask the question to try and resolve the problem. If things are really ongoing and really frustrating, then fair, obviously, quit if it's not working out. But I'm just like, how did you skip the stage where you try to solve the issue? And for some reason, it did make me think that it might be to do with generational differences. And I don't want to like whitewash all of Gen Z and say that they're all like that, because obviously not. I was thinking maybe she could have had a conversation with her friends, like her flatmates, and they're like, wait, you don't know if this class is happening and you're stressed? Oh my God, that's so out of order of them. That's a boundary that they've crossed. Something like this, where you kind of egg each other on. It's like, yeah, you're right. That's my boundary. I need to assert. And I think that's actually quite a key difference between Gen Z and Millennials. Millennials are more apologetic and like, oh, it's all me, it's my fault, and don't really have strong boundaries. Whereas Gen Z are like, you've wronged me. I'm going to assert my boundary.
This is a big thing. Yeah, the Gen Z, they seem to talk about setting boundaries a lot, whereas we seem to be recovering from trauma or something like that. So yeah, and you're right. We're super apologetic. That's exactly right. We struggle to set boundaries. Gen Z have no problem setting boundaries. That is a key difference. I don't know many Gen Z people, to be honest with you. I think you're better placed to talk about them than I am. But the ones that I have known are all very like, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it my way. If anything gets in the way of that, then forget it.
Yeah, I think it shows up in the way people talk that is a lot more direct with Gen Z. I feel like that sort of soft, I guess, Britishness is kind of phasing out in a way with the younger generations.
It seems to be, actually, yeah. We don't tiptoe around so much anymore, which is a strange thing. So that's the main differences between Gen Z and Millennials. I mean, they also make a lot of fun of us for wearing like ankle socks and skinny jeans, being obsessed with Harry Potter, using the wrong emojis, loads of different things. What else are we obsessed with? Oh, saying like doggos instead of dog, and like having cutesy words for things, and just generally being extremely cringe. But obviously that's something that all generations laugh at older generations for. But there is currently in the culture right now, there is this kind of like Gen Z versus millennial battle, because they're replacing us. They're cooler than us. They're more direct than us. They've got their heads screwed on a bit more than we do. And they just find us very embarrassing.
I wonder as well if they've witnessed our generation and older being really cringy with the alcohol and taking it too far and making a fool of ourselves. And they've thought, do you know what? I don't want to be like that. And so they've started to drink less.
Yes, this is something that really, really surprised me, is that Gen Z are the most abstemious, meaning they don't indulge in drugs and alcohol and things. They're a much more abstemious generation than we were. We were basically the last generation to really overdo it with the booze. We're one of the booziest generations of all time. Gen Z are just not interested. They're much more into, it's sort of the stuff we were talking about on previous episodes, like coffee raves and hikes and climbing and just doing active stuff. They don't want to waste their time getting drunk all the time. Because for their generation, by the time they came of age, it was too expensive to go out and do these things. Whereas we caught the tail end of it, sort of proper nightlife, whereas Gen Z just aren't interested in that really, which is quite interesting.
And it seems like they do make the decisions more from a place of being sensible or choosing the life that they want, as opposed to millennials who sometimes make decisions out of anxiety or just FOMO or like trying to feel in control or something.
Well, it goes back to the thing you were saying about trying to escape. Like, we're always trying to like escape from something or kind of maybe fantasize a little bit. And one of the ways that you do that is by drinking.
Or if you were a non-drinker as a millennial, which I guess I kind of am, it might be more like, I need to control my health.
Yeah, I think so.
Like really anxious.
Whereas for Gen Z, they're just like, nah, it's expensive, it's a waste of time, I don't care, I'm not going to do it. Which is interesting because in the same way that you were saying like their directness is very un-British, not drinking, I mean, that's a huge part of our culture that is rapidly changing with the generations. And I never thought I'd see the day when teenagers and people in their 20s were not going out to the pub and nightclubs all the time, but they don't anymore. The notions through the generations, our notions of Britishness are changing super, super fast. And honestly, I did not see any of it coming. And it's funny, like we're only 32. What's it going to be like when we're 42, 52? I mean, it's going to be just completely and utterly different. You know, I can't even imagine what Britain's going to be like in that time.
Should we get on to Gen Alpha? Again, I don't know that many people of that age category, but I know a couple, and the humour is just a lot more strange. They seem to like things that are totally freakish and weird. Like, you know about Skibbity Toilet?
I do know about Skibbity Toilet, yes.
Like the fact that that's the thing to come out of that generation is like, what is coming next?
And then, everything gets described as skibbity, but it's just a nonsense word that can mean anything. I wouldn't recommend to many of our listeners that you go and watch Skibbity Toilet videos because it's what you call brain rot. It's basically just stuff that is destroying your brain. It's really like pointless. Having said that, though, Gen Alpha are associated with this crazy sense of humour. I don't think it's that different from our humour because we grew up with like crazy internet humour.
Do you remember Badger?
Exactly, Badger.
So that was already weird, wasn't it? See, this is why I don't think it's about the actual the time period or the people. It's literally just as you get older. For example, millennials are more anxious because we've moved into a higher responsibility phase of life. So that's why our parents would have been anxious at that time. And then as we get older, again, probably will become more baby boomer, which is, we'll talk about that in a sec, but more kind of get on with it, dry humour. Isn't everything awful sort of thing?
It is interesting that, like you change obviously we all change as we get older, but your generation doesn't stay static. You do ease yourself into different modes of life and ways of thinking naturally as you get older. So we should explain that like the generations aren't set exactly. By the time we're old, yes, some aspects of being a millennial will be the same, but a lot of them will change as well. It's a very fluid thing. It's never a set thing.
Yeah, I thought it really highlighted that fact when I was watching a sort of an interview about the making of Friends. So that was obviously in the 90s. And they were talking about, people saying Friends is just like a Gen X thing. They're just lazy and they sit around and they do nothing. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that was the stereotype about Gen X. So that's like our parents' generation. I was slightly younger. Whereas now that's more Gen Z.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's also, there's certain things that the generations always say about the younger generation. That they're not as dedicated, that they're lazy, that they don't know what they're doing, that their fashion is weird, or maybe their humor is weird. Like there's actually records in ancient Greece of generations complaining about the next generation. Sort of saying like, oh, young people don't read poetry anymore and they don't want to fight for Athens anymore and they're lazy and rubbish. And that was like 3,000 years ago or something. There's certain generational divides that have always existed and will always exist. That's just getting older, basically, grumbling about the generation below you and laughing at the generation above you, pretty much. That's just what happens. I think they, even more than Gen X, their whole life is just social media. Yeah, they're a very like digitalized generation. It's crazy even for Gen Z. They just live entirely on their phones and on screens.
And I guess they're at the age where they can and it doesn't really matter. My sister, who's Gen Z, is becoming more cautious or conscious of how she uses social media and stuff, which again, it maybe just reflects the fact that she's getting older and, she wants to be a bit more serious about achieving something in her career or whatever. Yeah.
This is also, Gen Alpha is also a generation that they were still very young when COVID hit. A big portion of their life was spent kind of in lockdown. They're socialized quite differently. With the younger generations, actually from Gen Z onwards, Gen Alpha, hopefully not Gen Beta as well, but apparently just generally speaking, they socialize in person less. They have fewer friends than ever before. Fewer romantic relationships. They're not having as much sex.
I witnessed this when I was doing the masters at Oxford. So obviously I was a mature student. I was over 30. The other classmates were in their mid-20s. And over time, I just started to notice that the cues that I'm used to, where when you're talking to someone, you look them in the eye and you make facial expressions that are like, I'm listening and I'm open to what you're saying, didn't seem to be there in quite the same way. People would do it to each other, the sort of not engaging, and then it makes people feel anxious because they're not sure if they're being listened to. I just definitely noticed there was something a bit different about how they engaged with each other. And I wasn't sure, is this just me? Am I like now old and I actually have a different rhythm, which could also be the case. You know, when you're young and you're like, oh yeah, that old person, they're fine, but it's kind of hard to engage with them. Like maybe it was like that. Or maybe it's sort of COVID and lockdowns and social media have affected the way that people socialize.
Yeah, just the sheer amount of screen time. You're just not used to socializing in person. You're not developing those cues, and I think that could very well be a factor in it. But have you heard about the Gen Z stare?
Yeah. What, so it's just like a blank.
They don't kind of emote or respond in the way that they think they're going to. So when you're talking to them, they're just kind of like, staring blankly at you, kind of like.
That is quite interesting, isn't it? If it is the case of people just out of practice.
I hope that consciously our generation raises them to socialize in person a lot more. So it will be very interesting to see if this, have we peaked with social media use and screen use? And for the next generation, because we're more aware of it, they might escape that actually, a less digital generation than the generation before them, which is quite interesting.
I hope so. Well, Gen Beta, so they're currently newborns, born in 2025 onwards, Gen Beta. So, they're not a thing yet. They're just babies. I have high hopes. Well, because I'm going to raise a couple of them and I'm going to be like, no, those screens, I have absolutely no place in our house. I have no interest. At the moment, I'm feeling pretty optimistic that I'm going to be pretty, get out in the real world, use your body, like socialize with actual human beings. So I don't know if other parents will be the same, but I get a sense possibly.
I think it'll be very difficult to reconcile that with their school, which will probably have quite a few screens involved.
They're not going to school.
Oh, of course, yeah, you're going to homeschool them. So you've covered that one off.
Well, we'll see. The practicalities of that might be different, but yeah, the dream is to have our own private semi-homeschool, semi-on their own, but it's like with other kids.
The Susie Woo school.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Wow. Dear Lord. Well,
dear Lord, it's going to be great.
I'm just joking. Because our generation are becoming parents now, it will be interesting to see if they can manage that. Because, the world will be filled with screens. The world will be filled with jobs that involve screens. So AI is another factor. If the predictions of AI come true, then none of us are going to be working. So how do you prepare your kid for a world where there's no work?
Follow your passion, creativity, think outside the box. Yeah, I'm quite hopeful.
Certainly with our generation, because obviously we came off this huge disappointment of thinking that it was going to be like the boomers world, and then it wasn't. I do think we'll empower our kids' generation, Gen Beta. I think we were sort of almost disempowered by the boomers in a weird way. Yeah,
by being mollycoddled and looked after too much.
Yeah, and taught that it was all just going to fall into our laps, basically. But I think with this new generation, we're over the disappointment now, so we're going to be teaching them, like get a side hustle, do this, do that, as you say, like use your body, be more active. Like I think they could be a much healthier generation than our generation. There's just so many things that will be involved in their life that we can't even predict yet. It's kind of exciting, but it's also kind of worrying. I can imagine nearly a parent. You must be thinking about these things quite a lot. Let's see how Gen Beta do.
Yeah, I guess it's more thinking, what kind of experience would I have wanted to have? And I'm like, I think, the school system doesn't make sense to me. Being on social media on your own a lot doesn't make any sense. I'll try and orchestrate it a bit differently. I'm probably going to delude them into thinking that the future's bright again. And then they'll be disillusioned just like we were.
See if they do get disillusioned. Maybe they'll be better than everyone. I weirdly do have high hopes. I think they could be really, really good. So basically, the millennials have reached the point where they're having kids, and we have mutual friends who are having children. Yeah, we're moving to a new phase of life. So it's the millennials are going to have to get their act together and be a bit more grown up because we're parents now. So yeah. The
real privilege now is not being rich or having opportunities. It's whether your parents can support you.
Wow. That's quite daunting. Yeah.
Because if you don't have the help of parents, it's just incredibly difficult to get by.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah. I mean, I can barely support myself as it is. So I'm kind of worried about the amount of support I'd have to provide for my children, if I do have children, of course. Why don't we move on now to Gen X, who are the generation before us? This is a weird generation in the West because they kind of go under the radar. People don't know that much about them or really care about them that much. They don't have a big presence in the culture. Like, people don't talk about them very much.
So they are born between 1965 and 1980, which makes them currently in their late 40s and 50s.
Yes, the very earliest of their generation is turning 60 now, which is quite crazy. But basically, the way I think of Gen X people is they're slightly more chilled versions of boomers who grew up playing video games and going to raves.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good summary.
By raves, we mean like big parties in nightclubs and stuff like that.
I feel like they often can be quite cool, can't they? I feel like they tend to be more dark. The humour tends to be more cynical, maybe.
They were often in their 20s and 30s during the 90s, and it's seen as a very cynical decade after the sort of greed and excess of the 80s. The 90s is a much more conscious, cynical, a slightly darker decade, and that's infused in their sense of humour and the way they behave and everything. They're very kind of anti-corporate, pretty cynical about the world. But yeah, I think they're generally quite a chill generation. They're quite a fun generation. I feel that millennials can relate to them quite a lot. There's a lot of similarities there, much more than, say, millennials to Gen Z. I think there's less of a gap between millennials and Gen X. Things like nightlife, humour, attitudes to work and stuff like that, it's pretty similar. But I think we're more anxious than them. They're more chilled.
I think millennials are more about trying to solve their trauma. That if their child has a tantrum in the supermarket, they might come down to the child's level, be like, no, this is about my trauma that's affected you, and now we need to discuss our feelings, and it's very like emotional. Whereas Gen X would be just get on with it. They're not going to overshare their emotions.
They do share that a slightly more boomerish aspect where, yeah, they are not so obsessed with their feelings. They're not so introspective. They're not so anxious. They do blend a little bit with the boomers. They also caught the tail end of the boomers' good years. So they were still able to get cheap property. They were still able to get decent jobs and decent wages-ish. Not on the boomers level, but they caught the very tail end of that, I would say. And I think a few of them did, unfortunately, get walloped by the 2008 recession. I feel like a lot losing homes and opportunities, jobs and things. But yeah, generally pretty chill generation. Good music, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And they also are quite good because they have very, very clear memories of the analog world before digital, but they were still young enough to click on to the digital stuff, to like learn it really quickly. A lot of Gen Xers can remember when computers were coming into the workplace and stuff like that, but they were young enough in their 20s that they could just learn it quickly. So they kind of got the best of both worlds, really. That's basically Gen X. And now, unfortunately, we must turn our attention to possibly my least favorite generation, the baby boomers. Yes, our parents' generation. Oh, they're so annoying.
So just to clarify, they're born between 1946 and 1964, which makes them over 60. You find them annoying? Why?
Oh, God, they're irritating because they're just so like...
Because they're our parents, that's why.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And who could be more irritating than your parent? Oh, because they just had such an easy ride and they just act like they did it all themselves.
And now they're all smug.
Yeah, they're so smug, exactly, yeah. They had the easiest ride, I think, of any generation. I mean, obviously the world they grew up in was quite a dangerous world. You know, there was the Cold War, there was like a lot of bad stuff happening. Same with most generations, but economically, they just had it so sweet for so many decades.
I guess it depends what job they did, though, because my parents were GPs and it sounds kind of awful that they had to work 90-plus hour weeks. I mean, things have changed. Their working conditions are a bit more humane now.
Okay, so I will agree with you that their working life was much more old school. It was much more hardcore, shall we say. But their generation had the advantage of, if you were prepared to put the hours in, you will almost certainly be rewarded. Not just rewarded a little bit, you'll be rewarded in spades because cheap houses, cheap consumer goods, higher wages to cost ratio. You could just live a good life and have a normal job and just have like a decent life. And they grew up in a time when a lot of Western economies were still growing really, really fast. So loads of opportunities.
It's a lot more predictable.
Yes, a lot more stable. But you are right in that their working world is definitely more hardcore. Effectively, the boomers raised us to expect that our lives were going to be the same as their lives, which obviously hasn't happened. It was all about go to university, get a good job, work really hard, and then you'll have untold riches and your life's going to be amazing. That did not happen.
Yeah, it was all about going to university, wasn't it? I know we touched on this in our university episode, but it was like, don't bother doing much else because if you get a good degree, you're sorted, which is absolutely
exactly.
not the case.
Yeah, study, and it'll be fine. But then they have the nerve to sort of have a go at us for like wasting money and stuff. They sort of say like, oh, well, millennials just buy avocado toast every morning. And if you saved that money, you could buy a house. And when you add up the money, it's nowhere near a house. So it's just nonsense. So they still think in terms of boomer prices of things. That's my bugbears about the boomers. You know, I saved up and I got a house and why can't you do it? And it's just like, they don't understand that things have changed. But I think a lot of them are pretty kind of dismissive of us. But then that's what you do with younger generations, right? You're supposed to be dismissive of them. I did my Spotify Wrapped recently.
Like a compilation of your top songs over the year, is it?
And your listening habits for the year as well. And my listening age is the age of a baby boomer. So my listening age is 72. That's the one thing I do envy of the boomers, not just their prosperity, but I love their music. They have the best music of any generation, I think. My dad has a poster of all of the old tickets from gigs he went to, and he just has like the coolest bands on there, and I'm always very jealous. I think their youth culture was unmatched. They had the best youth culture out of any generation, full stop.
Does sound great, doesn't it? Like disco. How fun would that be? You've got like the sort of set moves. It's not just like randomly pump your fist in the air and that's dancing. It's like everyone can dance together. How lovely.
Exactly, in a cool nightclub setting. There's also one thing that's very important to note about the boomers is that in Britain and in the West, they were the generation that basically, in a lot of cases, lost their religion. So this is a huge generational gap from our grandparents' generation. The boomers often became atheist.
Oh, and of course, it was the introduction of the contraceptive pill in their generation.
Exactly, which is another huge difference. So basically, our grandparents' generation, when you dated someone, you dated to marry, you didn't date for very long, and you normally got married at like 20, had some kids, finished. The boomers were able to take their time a bit. In the 60s, there was the beginnings of, what you'd call free love and liberalization, where you weren't expected to marry straight away and have kids straight away. You could have multiple partners, you could experiment, you could find your own way. That was tied to a loss of religion as well. Obviously, Christianity says you must marry before you can have sex, you must have sex to have children, etc. The boomers did quietly kind of put all that in the bin, pretty much. And that's what we inherited. So our ways of romantic life and social life are basically inherited from the baby boomers, not from our grandparents' generation. So that's a huge generational divide between our grandparents and parents. Probably among the biggest out of all of them, to be honest with you.
What's great is they had this liberalization without totally changing the economic system yet. Whereas now, if you don't have two working parents, you can't basically make it. You could still have just the dad working. Whereas now, you know what I mean.
Let's round things off with the last generation we're going to touch on, which is the silent generation.
I have to say, I don't really know anything about this generation. I wasn't that close with my grandparents.
I see. That's interesting. I still am close with my remaining grandparent. So this generation was born basically before the Second World War. That's the thing to note about them. They were born in the 1920s and 30s, and I think the mid-40s. Big difference between their generation and all of the subsequent generations is that a lot of them grew up with very little material wealth. In some cases would not really have a lot of food in the house, not being able to heat the house to afford fuel, lived in very small, cramped houses with big families. That's a huge difference between the silent generation and the boomers, is that the silent generation in the West still grew up with massive families, which is not a big feature of the West anymore. It would be very normal to have like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 siblings and all live in a house together, very cramped conditions, not a lot of money. It was a very difficult life, basically. And fortunately, when they came of age after World War II, that's when things started to get better. So their generation saw a huge change in their wealth and their material circumstances, basically. That's the defining characteristic of that generation. When they were growing up, they had very little. By the time they got old, they had loads. Well, in a lot of cases, not in every case, of course, but that is a big trend of their generation.
No, this generation's coming back to me now through stories from my dad about his childhood. And so he had 4 siblings. Sounds like they basically just weren't really given enough to eat. He would be sent to bed at 6 p.m. when the sun was out. I think they weren't very nice in other ways. Yeah, the sort of level of deprivation that you're describing.
I think this actually informs a lot of the boomers' attitudes to us, because oftentimes their parents were quite negligent, sort of raise yourself almost. They'd be very strict and disciplinarian. But by and large, they didn't want to hear from you. They didn't do a lot of parenting. They just kind of let you do what you wanted.
My dad said he was basically raised by his older sister, who was like 20 years older than him.
Yeah, that's very common. As long as you provided for your children, that was it. You weren't expected to do much more than that. Like,
keep them alive.
Exactly, keep them alive. I mean, I remember my dad saying, his dad, my grandfather, I don't think ever took him to the cinema, for example, like once in their whole childhood. Basically, he earned the money and that he saw that as his duty, and that was it, basically. There's not like, oh, how are you feeling today? Oh, how's this going? How's that going? Helicopter parenting, which is what the boomers did to us, where they're like so obsessed with your progress and how you're doing as a person, because they didn't get that from their parents.
Wasn't it child-centric parenting only came in from the 80s or something like that? And that's this whole shift towards, what does the child need?
But basically, yeah, the second half of the 20th century is when people began to realize, oh, you can actually do a bit more for your kids than just feed them. It became fashionable to kind of care about more than that in their life, basically. Yeah, they're a very quite a strange generation, that there's just a big divide between them and us and them and the boomers. They're kind of on their own, really, because they're often more religious, much more socially conservative. These big families that they grew up with. Again, the material conditions of their childhood were completely different to ours. They lived through the Second World War, which is crazy to begin with. Yeah, they're just a very different values, different ways of seeing the world.
And the class system was really, really strong at that point. This is where we get the stereotypes about, the posh and the working class.
You were much more expected to stay in your class, and the idea of social mobility, being able to move between classes, that only really picked up speed, say, from about the 50s onwards. Before that, forget it, basically. Also, the divide between men and women was much more extreme. So when my grandma went to school, for example, she was just taught to cook and clean. She was actually actively discouraged from learning maths or English because they thought, well, you're going to be a wife anyway, so it doesn't matter. You don't need to learn these things. So she was genuinely discouraged from getting an education at school, which is insane.
Which again makes sense because the contraception hadn't even been invented then. So it's like, well, you probably are just going to have children and that's it.
Yeah, get to about 20, get married, pop a few kids out, and that's your life. Get used to it. Another thing would be the expectation that you might not even live that long. In your 60s and 70s, you probably will die of something because medicine wasn't as good. Yeah, very different views of life. So it's kind of hard to relate to them.
Do you know what sort of lifestyle or position your grandparents were in? I think mine were quite interesting. I feel like on my mum's side, her parents were more working class, whereas my dad's were more like middle upper class. But at the same time, they sort of struggled. So they were academics, but they weren't earning huge amounts of money. So it's things like academia, music, all of that, very important. But at the same time, struggling to feed their family. It's a bit of a strange combination.
Generally not having a lot of money around is a defining characteristic of the generation, but your dad's side would be the exception, not the rule, because the middle class was much smaller back then. Basically, the vast majority of people in their generation were working class, which meant you do a job to do with your hands, like a physical job, farmer, coal miner, shipbuilder, whatever. My grandparents, their story is much more typical of their generation. Very difficult upbringing, get through World War II, then things start to improve. And actually, on both sides of my family, they made the transition from being working class to kind of lower middle and middle class. It's a very typical story. So did a working job before the war, kind of in the middle of the war, things improve, and then they end up in a managerial position or set up their own business, or they get a white collar job. They were able to transition. And that's very good because their lives improved hugely. A story we always told in the family that at my grandma's school, this is my dad's mum, there were kids at school who didn't have shoes. They were just running around barefoot. They couldn't even afford to. And this is in the north of England in the 1920s. I mean, it's freezing cold. You can't heat your house half the time. You got little barefoot kids running around. I mean, it's a completely different universe. I mean, they grew up in the era of like horses and buggies, basically, instead of cars. It's just a different universe. So it's very hard to relate to them, basically, is the bottom line.
And also, I feel very sorry for anyone, over the age of 80, having to deal with all this technology now. Like, you can't do anything without a login and a passcode and a whatever facial recognition. Really frustrating.
This is very typical of their generation is, frustration with technology because they were just too old by the time the world was digitalizing. I mean, some of them had already retired when the internet came along, when mobile phones came along. They don't have a clue, basically. I
think it's actually really lovely that that's still around, that culture, that it still exists. Like, people are still using mail and actually going to their neighbour's house to ask them something rather than sending a WhatsApp message. Like, I think that's so lovely that it still exists.
Looking up something in a book instead of Googling it. You actually had to use your brain and find the part of the book that would tell you, like an encyclopedia or something. You had to actually have books in the house and read and think. And I do agree, in some ways their lives were actually better. We should just briefly touch on the generation above the silent generation, who are called the greatest generation. They are the generation that fought in World War II. Well, this generation is now in their 90s, really, and to be honest, in the back end of their 90s. So they're rapidly vanishing from before us. So really, in the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be nobody left who fought in the Second World War, who really remembers the Second World War except as a child. It's a bit of a worry because I think when these things start passing into history, it means that you can start making the same mistakes all over again. It is quite sad to see them pass away. Obviously, it's sad when anyone passes away, but yeah, it's a particular generation that lived through the biggest conflict in human history and fought in it. So to kind of see them leave, it does make me a bit apprehensive about the future sometimes. The only people I can remember from this generation were like older people that I knew as a child, so sort of like great aunties, and I don't know anyone from this generation now, unfortunately.
No, me neither. But I guess it's a good place to end. We have a lot to owe them, to be fair. If we think about how the trajectory of the 20th century has gone, it would not be quite the same if it was not for those people. So if there does happen to be anyone over the age of 98 listening, we are grateful to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Somehow something tells me that perhaps we haven't cornered that demographic just yet. But anyway.
You never know.
You never know. You never ever know. But yeah, that's everything for this episode and for this series. We're finishing here. Let us know how we're doing. Keep sending in questions, and we'll be back hopefully with another series for you. Loads more topics about Britishness and life in the UK. It's been a lot of fun. How have you found it, Suze?
Are we calling it a series or a season?
I think we should call it a series because that's the British way of saying it.
Fair. Okay.
Did I say season?
Yeah, series sounds good. It's been great. I'm actually impressed that we managed to get to episode 10. There was a point where we both sort of forgot or didn't turn up for various reasons. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed that we've actually managed to come this far. Now it's a case of just getting it out there, and hopefully someone listens. And if you are listening, send us more questions, because there's so much more that we can talk about, and we can make a new series, which we would love to do.
But until then, keep listening, keep learning, and we'll see you. We'll hopefully see you very soon.
See you soon. Bye, guys.
Bye.